Welcome to the video tutorial on how to configure PageGate's email filtering system. In this tutorial, we'll be going over the different methods of filtering email available to PageGate's GetMail interface and its mail server. Before we begin, PageGate's GetMail interface must be configured and started before you can configure an email filtering system. This can be done in a variety of ways, and I'd recommend having a look at our overview of the GetMail module for more information, as you'll need an understanding of the GetMail interface and PageGate's mail server to understand how to implement an email filtering system. There are two different layers of email filtering that can be implemented. The first is mail service filtering. This method of filtering enables PageGate's mail server to accept or reject email based on rules you configure, and is used when having PageGate host a domain or subdomain for messaging. This filtering configures the server-wide rules on what traffic is and is not allowed to flow through the system. For example, you could configure an IP filtering system that only allowed specific IP addresses to send email to PageGate. Or, you could configure a sender's name filtering system that blocked specific email addresses or even specific domains from sending traffic to your PageGate server. This method of filtering cannot be used in conjunction with POP mail collection. Which leads us to our second method, GetMail filtering. This method of filtering configures the mail server engine to accept all inbound email, and then emails are scanned and filtered after the fact. This is the only method of email filtering that works with POP mail collection to bring traffic into PageGate. Both filters effectively achieve the same thing. They both block unwanted messages. The difference is at what stage the block happens and if you want to notify the sender that the block is happening. However, when you use POP mail collection to receive email traffic into PageGate, those emails have already been accepted by the receiving POP server and are simply collected by PageGate. PageGate's mail server has no immediate control over those messages, so we'll have to filter them at the GetMail level instead. Effectively, GetMail filtering is post hoc, and mail service filtering is real-time. To configure either style of filter, there's some basic setup we'll need to go through. Before we go into details about how to configure each of the different filters, let's do our basic setup. The first step in creating an email filter is to find the PageGate database folder. To determine that, open the PageGate admin, then go to the Program, Settings section. Here on the right, you'll see the database directory. Make a note of that folder, then browse to it in Windows. Here in the database folder, we need to create a new directory and name it Filters. Here inside the Filters folder, we can create the files that control each of the different filters we may need to configure. The first step in creating a filter is to create the file associated with the filter, then populate it with information. All files associated with the mail server and GetMail filters have no extension associated with them, so when you create these files, make sure that your text editor does not put a RTF or TXT or any other extension on the file. Also, these files will have one of two functions, allow or block. Allowed lists will always override blocked lists, so if an entry exists in both, it will be allowed. It's also important to note that everything is allowed by default if the block file doesn't exist, so implementing an allowed file without a corresponding block file is redundant. The purpose of the allowed file is to narrow, qualify, or create an exception to an entry in the blocked file. The contents of these files are read in when the GetMail service starts, which means that updates to your email filter rules are not automatically applied. To apply any updates that you've made to a filter, you will need to stop and restart the PageGate GetMail service. We'll go over how to do that at the end of the video. Let's go over mail server filtering first. PageGate's mail server can filter email based on three categories: the IP address of the sending system, the sender's name or from address, and the intended recipient of the email. So first, we have IP address filtering. This filter allows you to control which IP addresses are and are not allowed to contact your system. There are two files that we can create for this filter. The first is blocked IPs. It's important to note that these files are case-sensitive, so be sure to punctuate them exactly like I'm showing in the video. If the blocked IPs file exists, it tells PageGate what IP addresses are not allowed to connect to this mail server. The companion file is allowed IPs. If this file exists, it tells PageGate what IP addresses are allowed to connect to this mail server. Each line of either file will need to have an IP address that should be allowed or blocked. As an important note, if either file only contains the single character asterisk, that tells the mail server that all IP addresses should be allowed or blocked. For example, you could use a single asterisk in the blocked IPs file and then list 3 or 4 specific IPs in the allowed IPs file. This would tell the program that all IP addresses except for the ones you've specified in the allowed IPs file are denied access to the system. Next we have sender filtering. The 2 files associated with this filter are blocked senders and allowed senders. Again, these file names are case sensitive. In either file, enter a full or partial sender email address on a line by itself. It's important to note that information is matched from right to left and that partial addresses are allowed. This allows you the ability to block specific email addresses, block by domain, or block by partial domain. For example, if you were to just use .com on a line by itself in the blocked senders file, that would configure PageGate to block any sender's name that ends with .com. Or you could use gmail.com on a line by itself to block all messages from the gmail.com domain. As another example, you could use .com in the blocked senders file, then use gmail.com and notepage.com in the allowed senders file to create a rule that blocks all senders domains that end in .com except for gmail.com and notepage.com. Next we have the recipient filtering. The 2 files associated with this filter are blocked recipients and allowed recipients. On each line of either file, enter a full or partial recipient or group name. It's important to note that information is matched from right to left and that partial addresses are allowed. For example, if you were to just use _shift on a line by itself in the blocked recipients file, that would configure the filter to block all messages to any recipient or group whose name ends with the characters _shift. As another example, if you were to use agency_heads, that would only block email from being delivered to the specific recipient or group named agency_heads. If either file only contains the single character asterisk, that tells the mail server that all recipients should be allowed or blocked. For example, you could use a single asterisk in the blocked recipients file and then list 3 or 4 specific recipient or group names in the allowed recipients file. This would tell the program that the only recipients and groups available to message are the ones you've explicitly granted access to in the allowed recipients file. So that handles the mail server level filtering, and now let's go over the getMail level filtering. The getMail filter can only filter based on sender's name. A getMail filter can be applied to a single recipient or group, multiple recipients or groups, or all recipients and groups. The 2 files associated with the getMail rule for all recipients and groups are global.don'tallow and global.allow. On either line of each file, enter a full or partial sender email address. It's important to note that information is matched from right to left, and that partial addresses are allowed. For example, if you were to use just .com on a line by itself in the global.don'tallow file, that would configure PageGate to block any sender's name that ends with .com. Or as another example, you could use gmail.com to block all messages from the gmail.com domain. As another example, you could use .com in the global.don'tallow file, then use gmail.com and notepage.com in the global.allow file to create a rule that blocks all senders' domains that end in .com except for gmail.com and notepage.com. If either file only contains the single character asterisk, that tells the mail server that all sender addresses should be allowed or blocked. For example, you could use a single asterisk in the global.don'tallow file and then list 3 or 4 specific email addresses and/or domains in the global.allow file. This would tell the program that all sender addresses except for the ones you've specifically allowed in the global.allow file are denied access to the system. It's also possible to configure getMail level sender blocking for a single recipient or group. There are two files associated with the getMail rule for a single recipient or group, and that's the recipient or group name .allow and recipient or group name .don't allow. The name of the file will be determined by the name of the recipient or group as it exists in the PageGate admin. For example, if your group name is IT Alerts, the file's name would be italerts.allow or .don't allow. On each line of the file, enter a full or partial sender email address. It's important to note that information is matched from right to left and that partial addresses are allowed. This allows you the ability to block by specific email address, block by domain, or even block by partial domain. As an example, you could use just .com on a line by itself in the recipient name .don't allow file. That would configure PageGate to block any sender's name that ends with .com, or you could use gmail.com to block all messages from the gmail.com domain. As another example, you could use .com in the recipient.don'tallow file, then use gmail.com and notepage.com in the recipient.allow file to create a rule that blocks all sender domains that end in .com except for gmail.com and notepage.com. To apply changes made to the email filtering system, we'll need to cycle PageGate's getMail service. To do that, open the PageGate admin and the PageGate monitor. Here in the admin, expand the Interfaces section, right-click on getMail, and select Stop. Here in the PageGate monitor, we should see the getMail module go from green to red. When it does, go back into the PageGate admin, right-click on getMail, and select Start. You should then see the interface go from red to green in the PageGate monitor, indicating that the interface is running and that your changes have been applied. This concludes the video tutorial on PageGate's email filtering system. For more information, including an overview of the getMail interface, please visit our website, www.notepage.net.